Moromai, Nullet Gennel. This is Judith Lay welcoming you to a special Christmas Day edition of At Your Service. And on this special day, as we celebrate the birth of Jesus Christ, I have a special guest, our new Bishop of Sodor and Man, the Right Reverend Tricia Hillas. Joy to the world, the Lord has come. And in the course of the next hour, there'll be more music celebrating the birth of the baby who was God's Son, Jesus Christ, and the message of love and hope that baby brings to each one of us, the message that lies at the very heart of this season of Christmas. And now let's welcome my special guest. She's only been the Bishop of Sodor and Man for the last 2 months, but already the Right Reverend Tricia Hillas has shown that she's keen to immerse herself in all aspects of Manx life, and she's keen to get to know as many people as possible. But this morning is a chance for us to get to know her a little better. She's very happy to simply be called Tricia, and we're starting our conversation with a search for some early Christmas memories. Tricia, would they be from your early childhood in Malaysia, where you were born?
Yes, absolutely, they would. The very first would be in Malaysia itself. And my father was the engineer of a tin mine in Malaysia, which meant that we lived actually way up country in the sort of a slightly more remote part. And in that place, there were a number of international families who lived and worked around the mine. So in that community setting, we would have, and I remember it really well, some of those things that you would expect to have anywhere. A visit from Father Christmas for all the children who lived on the mine compound. Because it was a tropical nation, but actually my dad had come from rural Lincolnshire, we never had snow, of course, but there would be cotton wool stretched out along the windowsills and on the artificial Christmas tree and on the tropical rainforest tree that had been brought in. So it was this real combination of a traditional European Christmas and a deeply rooted in Malaysian Christmas. So that was a lovely mix.
Did you grow up in a Christian household, Tricia?
Actually, the household was really complex in a beautiful way, I think. So my dad was probably not religious at all until his very later life. And I'm happy to say more about that later. My mum came from a mixed family. Her mother, my grandmother, was Roman Catholic and actually very devout. My grandfather was Hindu, also very devout. So it was a real mix of a family. I don't think my mum at that stage particularly had a strong sense of faith. And happily, that was also to come later. So those early days were very much about family, about community, and around fun and joy and all the beautiful things that we still associate with Christmas. But probably the faith element was going to come later.
Choose something for us now, Tricia, that takes you back to that time.
I think if it was in those very early days, if I'm honest, quite a lot of the music would have come from outside of church settings. So there are elements of that are actually still part of Christmas for me today. And I'm going to tell you a bit about a time when I was a parish priest in West London. And one of the most significant things for me was gathering us all together for a midnight mass, and all the community would pile into the church. It would be heaving. It was such a lovely place to be and to minister. And we would go through a very traditional service. All of the candles alight, choir, everybody will have sung all the very famous and wonderful carols. And then as the service had finished and just before everybody left, we would often sing, "So here it is, Merry Christmas." And actually that moment of marking that this is Christmas and now we're celebrating, they would have been those that were quite outside the church but still speak of the joy of Christmas.
Tricia Hillas, our brand new bishop, reminding us that there are many different ways of speaking of the joy of Christmas. Tricia, you were still very young, weren't you, when your parents made the decision to leave Malaysia?
We left Malaysia in 1971. I'm giving my age away now, for those who are quick at arithmetic. So we left in 71 and I was about sort of 6-ish and moved to Lincolnshire, which is where my father had been from. First of all, we lived in a caravan for a while we were waiting to move into a permanent home. And my parents bought a newsagent's in a village. So I spent my childhood really through to my teenage years as part of a family who did literally live over the shop in a village. And it was just the most wonderful place to grow up because everybody knew everybody and almost everybody at some point through the week or the month would come through our shop. And what was lovely actually about my parents, and especially my mum, I think, the door was always open, literally to the shop, but also into our house. And you never knew when you came in who would be in there. And especially at Christmas, there'd be mince pies being handed out, cups of tea and mulled wine. And it was just a part of the community centre, which was really lovely. My mum, she was an Indian woman who had been born in Malaysia, lived in Malaysia all through her adult life. So for her, the move was a hugely significant thing, leaving family back in Malaysia and moving into a new place, a new home, a new country. And she had never seen snow. And actually one of my strongest memories that is a thread through childhood, even to now, is what I've inherited is her sheer absolute delight of snow. So if it snowed a little, my mum would be out there. She would drag us out there. We would be out there making snow people. She just never lost that wonder. And so that was so much part of her excitement. And actually, that was part of who she was as well, that sense of wonder, of excitement and zest for life, actually.
In the days before supermarkets that never seemed to close, we relied on our corner shops to stay open to the very last minute. So, when your parents ran the local shop, Tricia, how much or how little time did you have for your family to actually have your Christmas?
You're absolutely spot on, and I think anyone who's worked in retail would recognise that the commitment actually to serving other people right to the very end meant that often our own preparations didn't quite happen. So one of my loveliest memories is actually literally running as a child with my mother through Lincoln High Street on Christmas Eve, because it had got to about 4:30 in the afternoon before she'd had time to go shopping. So we ran through Lincoln High Street buying new lights for the Christmas tree because the others had failed, buying the crackers, wondering would there still be enough left. So all of that meant that Christmas Day itself was full of excitement, and because it was a newsagent's, it meant that through the year she was used to working, as my dad was, getting up really early in the morning. So typically they'd be up for 4:30 in the morning. So it meant that a Christmas Day lie-in probably meant that she was getting up at about 6:30. And because she'd already been awake for 2 hours, the first thing I would often know, and my younger brother, would be about 6:30 in the morning, Mum and Dad rushing into our room saying, "Are you not awake yet?" and encouraging us to open presents. And I'm sure lots of parents and grandparents and other carers looking after children are used to being woken very early by excited children. In our house, it was often the other way round.
Excited parents.
Excited parents who'd already been waiting 2 hours.
And so would any kind of church going feature in this? Did you, in a new surrounding, did you get involved in any church life?
Funnily enough, I must have been quite a child. I took myself off to Sunday school at a Methodist church in the afternoons. So I would have been about, I think, seven or eight by then. And I am someone who loves creativity. And actually what they did so beautifully was to really welcome it. I don't think they were very used to many children at that point. So suddenly they had a new person who was inserting herself in. But they did beautiful craft and creativity, and I loved all of that, and all of the getting ready for Christmas, making paper chains and pictures and all of that. And they were also a church that encouraged me as a very young child, now then about 8 or 9, to read in the services. So that was the first time I would have stood in a context like that and shared in a service, and their gift of being able to see a child as someone who had something really to contribute and not just be pacified or entertained was really significant. So that's how I personally started a journey of faith that was more formal. I think that God is always deeply at work in our lives and in our world. And I think there's something about that thread of what God is doing and the flow of the Spirit almost. So allowing ourselves to move with that, I think that's what was happening. And part of this is still, for me, to do with a deep sense of meeting God in community, meeting God in nature and beauty, which is sort of draws on the more contemplative Christian traditions. And so where that led me next was in part a move away from church for a while. Just, other things happened. Life as a child, I don't mean life, serious life, but just, there was lots going on. And I was going to swimming and all of that busyness, which is lovely. But a little later, I started having contact with a youth worker in a church in the same village, Anglican church, and someone who, with others, really nurtured a group of us who were teenagers and opened the church and their homes actually to us. It was a really generous and gracious thing, and somewhere where I could explore questions and able to be welcomed. And that was very significant because remember that our family were mixed. We were in a place where we were newer than lots of people. We had roots, but we also were separated from some of our other family. So actually that sense of belonging is really important. And I think those loving Christians in both those church communities extended that sense of home and of belonging and of welcome in God's name, in Jesus' name.
Can I just come back to your parents, particularly to your mother? It must have been so difficult to leave all her culture, her family, to leave all that behind.
My grandfather had come from Kerala in India and had moved to Malaysia. In fact, from talking to aunties, it seems that he came to Malaysia as an indentured servant, which is a complex form of holding people. It's not quite slavery, but it has some really difficult and unpleasant associations. My grandmother, the Roman Catholic, had come from Colombo in Sri Lanka. And they had met and married in Malaysia. So they had already had that experience of what it was like to be in a new place. So I guess my mother knew what that was like, which I think in many ways means that it was even braver, really, to move again and to move so far. I do remember Christmas days, in the late 70s, I guess, or we would be called to the telephone, the one telephone. Some of us remember, before mobile phones, and there was a telephone in the hallway, and it was always cold out there. So we would be called to the telephone as my mother negotiated with the operator to try and be put through to Malaysia, which was on an 8-hour time difference, so in the middle of trying to do your turkey, you're thinking, when will we talk to grandmother? And it was always so, would we get through? Would the line survive? What do I say for me as a young child to this grandmother I barely remembered? Which is quite poignant, those leavings and connections. And now I have contact with my family in Japan, in Australia, in Malaysia, in the UK, all via Facebook. And we're constantly in touch, and it's so different.
You mentioned that both your mother and your father came to a faith awareness later in their life.
I'd started at about sort of 13, 14, going along to this local Anglican village church, a beautiful, smallish community, and I became a Christian. And so from time to time, and especially on Christmas, my mum especially might come with me. And so it was actually on a Christmas Eve midnight mass service. My mum and dad had both been to one of the village pubs, and they bowled out of the pub and came straight into church. And I remember my mum had the most amazing flashing Christmas earrings on. They were very dramatic and very my mum. And in she came, and there was something about the music. There was something about the beauty. There was something about the story that she was hearing that she would say, she and my dad have both passed, but I know that she would say that her life was changed and she became a Christian. She gave her life to Jesus that evening and, never stopped really. And for me as a daughter, that was a tremendous gift. And also later, my father, I think he sort of looked on in slight bewilderment, but was wholly supportive and so loving and a really interesting man. But actually later on, he developed cancer, actually, and he lived for about 3 or 4 years with quite serious cancer, which was probably attributed, one might say, to some of his early work experiences. And so he had bowel cancer and then lung cancer as well. And so those were complicated days for all of us, but really significant that we were able to be together as a family for much of that. And actually it was during that time that he, who had many years ago had some connection with Lincoln Cathedral, there'd once been talk about, in the family, would he have become a chorister at one point? But at that time, life was complicated, money was short in his family, and it just was not possible. But something reignited in him, and at that time he just found great solace and great comfort in faith. And he was very different. He was always the person who went to the 8:00 service, the very formal service, the service rich with beautiful words from the Book of Common Prayer. That was very much where he met God. And my mother was more of the sparkly earrings and the joy of other ways of encountering God. But Christmas was absolutely part of that story.
Once in royal David's city stood a lowly cattle shed, where our mother laid her baby in a manger for his bed.
this Christmas morning, it's my pleasure to have as my guest our still very new Bishop of Sodor and Man, the Right Reverend Tricia Hillas, who was consecrated bishop in October and moved to the island with her husband Andrew later that same month. And now Tricia, as she wants to be known, is rapidly becoming a familiar face in our community. Tricia, let's talk about your memories of Christmases before you were ordained. Let's go back to that time when you were deeply involved in youth and social work.
When I first left Lincolnshire, I went to East London and there worked with the Methodist Church. And one of the gifts that we were given was the opportunity to work with people who were affected by homelessness. And particularly in those times, women fleeing from complex relationships, some who were leaving situations of violence, and separately a project for people who were mostly living on the streets because of being homeless. And some of those opportunities to spend Christmas in that residential setting with mums and children who were homeless and were having to keep Christmas in the most strange and strained circumstance, and the resilience and the strength and the determination of many of those women to ensure that their children had a Christmas that they would not feel was any less than what it should be was astonishing. And then in the centre, which was on Cable Street in East London, where we would have meals every day and the centre was open, and there would be a nurse who would come in and attend to the feet of some of the mostly men, but some of the women too, a doctor who would come and see them. We would be providing food and just company. I got to clean out the urinals for the first time and mop the floor and do all that, and we did that all year. But at Christmas, there was just something really significant about us having the opportunity to spend time. So that was quite early on coming to London, and a particular type of engagement with community. And as you say, later on, I became a local authority social worker. And so working with particularly individuals and families affected by HIV and AIDS in those days when the prognosis was so different. And thanks be to God that medicine has moved on. But people who were really truly remarkable in their different ways, from someone who had been a fighter pilot for the US military, to someone who had been an architect, to someone who was bringing up her children on her own, who had fled from a terrible situation of war in a foreign country. All these different lives and their different connections and their way of just getting on with life and getting on with Christmas. And some who, because of the stigma that many people at that time experienced, were deeply traumatised and who were estranged from family. Sometimes family didn't feel able to come to funerals even. Those were really tough times. And yet, particularly at some of the drop-ins, there was a project called River House, which was right on the river in Hammersmith. And we had the best Christmas parties you can imagine. Or if you went into the Lighthouse Project in more central London, or the Mildmay Mission, which is still going and it still provides care from a Christian basis, they would be full of light and laughter and acceptance and joy and hope and the gritty reality of what life's like. And that sense for me of Christmas being both full of glitz and glamour and light and joy, but all of that reaching into what it really means to live as a human being. And the amazing news that God looks into that and in Jesus Christ has come into that light in the darkness.
Like a candle flame, flickering small in a darkness, uncreated light shines through infant eyes. God is with us, silent. God is with us, silent. Come to
Graham Kendrick's beautiful Candle Song. Tricia, it's obvious from the way you speak that you loved your career in social work, and so you could have stayed in that field and had a very worthwhile career. So when did it change? At what point did you start to think that maybe serving God as a priest, being ordained, was the way forward for you?
Sometimes I liken it to hearing music being played in another room. Maybe someone's playing the piano and it's persistent and you hear it and you can't quite ignore it, but you could get on with life. But something in you just thinks, do you know, I have to go and explore this. What is this? So actually that was my sense of call. It was not waking up and having a moment that something was written across the sky. But it was saying, actually, Lord, here am I, and is this what you're calling me to next? But I think you're actually completely right. I think we are all called to a vocation, and some of that is lived in a range of ways. And I think part of my sense of vocation is something about coming alongside other people, watching and waiting with people, helping them to discern where they're being called to and helping them to become those whom God has created them to be. So you can see how that works in social work. That's about people flourishing. Within the church and the church setting, I think that is where, for me, that is about bringing in the sense of, who people are called to be in God and their sense of being released for ministry, in mission, for service, and the sense of the good news being proclaimed. And I think as someone who loves teaching, who loves engaging with the scriptures, who loves worship and prayer, to be able to bring that into what I do and to what I hope to offer, I think that was the call. I think I could have been extremely happy being a social worker. I would have been extremely fulfilled. The fact that I have been able to do that and now I'm able to do this is beyond believing, really.
Mary, did you know that your baby boy would one day walk on water? Mary, did you know that your baby boy would save our sons and daughters? Did you know that your baby boy has come to make you new? This child that you've delivered would soon deliver you. Mary, did you know that your baby boy would give sight to a blind man? Mary, did you know that your baby boy would calm the storm with his hand? Did you know that your baby boy has walked where angels trod? And when you kiss your little baby, you kiss the face of God. The blind will see, the deaf will hear, the dead will live again. The lame will leap, the dumb will speak, the praises of the Lamb. Mary, did you know that your baby boy is Lord of all creation? Mary, did you know that your boy would one day rule the nations? Did you know that your baby boy is heaven's perfect lamb? This sleeping child you're holding is the great Mary,
Mary Did You Know, that version by Peter Hollins. We often talk about the things we always do at Christmas, but these can be both happy and painful if they're bound together with memories of the people who started those traditions and who aren't with us now.
We all have things that we love to do and the decorations that we might pull out and remember that, I picked this up when we were travelling, or this was the bauble my mum sent to me, which I still have, when I first moved to London and she wanted it from her tree to my tree, those things that connect us in time, but to people. And actually, for many of us, that comes with a sense of happiness in the remembering, a sense of joy, but also that sense of, and it will be different. Some of this connects us to what was and what can be never lost because it's in our memory. But also there are opportunities to make new traditions, that this is how it is this year. And this doesn't have to be how it is next year. I'm going to choose as to how I mark Christmas. No one can say that this or that is what makes a Christmas perfect. And I do love lots of the Christmas associated literature. And I do love A Christmas Carol, such a classic telling, so nuanced. But sometimes if you see that depiction and we don't go a little bit deeper into it, you get the sense that it is all about a particular way of doing a Dickensian Christmas. But actually, if you really look at what Dickens was writing about, he does give us the Cratchit family, and I love that sense of the little Cratchit children stuffing their mouths with spoons for fear that they would shriek for goose before it was ready. But he does more than that. He gives us other depictions of how other people were keeping Christmas. And so Scrooge was taken out by the spirit of Christmas and shown all of it. So that might include people having a great feast at home with everything that you could possibly imagine. But it might also be sailors who are on their boat far out to sea, or indeed two keepers stuck on their rock in a lighthouse who merely clink their cans of grog together and wish each other a very Merry Christmas. And that's all Christmas.
Have you had the opportunity over the years to include other people in your Christmases, friends who happen to be in that area at the time that you've given hospitality to?
Yeah, I think the openness of a Christmas table is fantastic, and that could be a table for one, as we've been saying. But it could also stretch, and I love stretchy tables. In fact, going back to childhood, one of the joys was that my mum would often have people for Christmas and joining us who I didn't know at all, And so that was always interesting and fun and slightly bizarre if you were in your pyjamas and there were people you didn't know. But that's a different story. But more recently, actually, Andrew and I, we don't have children of our own. So often we are inviting relatives or going to relatives. But in recent years, we've also been part of a couple of schemes that have enabled us to be able to open our homes to other people from around the world who might need somewhere to be staying, asylum seekers or refugees seeking aid, really. And some of the joy of that has been having our Christmases really enriched by practices and traditions, and I have to say especially food from around the world. So the last two people we had staying, or last two groups of people, one was a person who was from Eritrea, which was really fascinating. And also, it meant we had a fantastic curry on Christmas Day to go alongside the turkey and all the other things we were doing. And then the other, again, not long before we left Westminster, about the year before, we had an older couple who were from the Ukraine who had to flee at very short notice after the invasion and had not been able to return. And their being with us, again, transformed our Christmas and was just such a privilege to share and hear about how they would keep Christmas, what Christmas Eve meant to them, which was such a big occasion for celebration, and their marking of Christmas was so key around that. So Christmas is celebrated around the world so that we can understand more of one another through our traditions and our ways of keeping is always going to be really interesting, not least if it involves food.
Before you came to us, Tricia, you were Archdeacon and Canon of Westminster, making your parish church the historic Westminster Abbey. And before that, you were a Canon of St Paul's Cathedral, placing you in an even more iconic building even than the Abbey. But your first visit to St Paul's wasn't actually anything to do with your ministry there, was it? You weren't a priest. In fact, you weren't even thinking about being a priest, were you?
I had come from Lincolnshire, from a small village, and been part of a small and gorgeous parish church. I'd moved and I'd spent some time doing youth and community work, and then I was training as a social worker. And during my years of training, you were on placement. One was on placement, and I was on placement at the oncology unit of Bart's Hospital. And so I would ride the red number 15 bus from the East End of London into the very grand context of the City of London and make my way to the hospital. And going to and fro, walking past, on the way to the bus stop, I would pass this enormous cathedral. It was white and gleaming, and this was winter. And I noticed that actually there was some sign up, and I'd never been in it, but it talked about the Messiah. And I thought, I've never seen the Messiah. I've never heard it. I have a gap in my cultural life here. So that very evening, I thought, I'm going to queue up. So I joined the queue, a long snaking queue, to try and get into the cathedral to hear the Messiah. And I couldn't believe it, really, because I thought, I'm not going to get in. But I did. I squeaked in, and it wasn't quite the door slammed behind me, but I was put into the remotest corner. But I was in. And when the lights dimmed and the music started, honestly, it was such an invitation to choral music that I'd never thought I'd experienced. And the Messiah is still so significant a part of my Christmas. And so, when the sopranos and everything starts to lift as you hear, for unto us a child was born, it takes me right back to being in the semi-darkness of St Paul's Cathedral as a early 20-year-old, thinking, I can't believe I'm here. And then wind on with me a little, maybe even 20 years, and it was 2014, the Christmas of, and I had, a matter of months, been appointed as one of the canons of St Paul's. And it turned out that I would be on duty in December, which meant that part of my responsibilities was to climb into the great pulpit as the lights started to go down for the performance of the Messiah that year. And so to be in that place again for my first Christmas there, to announce that and to welcome people and to have the music start. Honestly, it was really one of those I can't believe I'm here moments.
For unto us a child is born,
For unto us a child is born, the wonderful music of the Messiah, that recording by the 16 conducted by Harry Christophers. Tricia, our conversation today has included largely the music that we expect to listen to at Christmas time. But let's have a word now about your own and your husband Andrew's music tastes.
Andrew and I, both of us, enjoy music a great deal, and a range of music. You know, I've talked a little bit about the choral tradition and, some of the great Christmas music that there is within that tradition, but also, some of the popular music that just makes your heart glad during this season. But folk music and independent music and world music and roots music really connects with community for me, and heritage and culture and what it means to be a people in a particular place. So some of the music that always is across our ears during the season will be music, for example, by Kate Rusby, who I suspect anyone who's interested in folk on the island may well know. And her music particularly is influenced by the folk traditions of Yorkshire, South Yorkshire and Derbyshire, and picks up on the fact that carols went way beyond the churches, but particularly were sung in pubs and on streets. And so I love the fact that Christmas music has church-based elements, but is also goes far beyond it. And I'm really keen to start to learn more about the Manx carols and the Manx Christmas music and where that happens. So this year there's been quite a lot to get to grips with, but I'm hoping in the years to come there'll be more and more of that.
Salute the happy morn, whereon the Saviour of mankind was born, and rise to adore the mystery of love, which hosts of angels chanted from above. With them the joyful tidings first begun, of kings and shepherds and of Mary's Son. To the watchful shepherds it was told, who heard the angelic herald voice, behold, I bring good tidings of the baby's birth to you and all the nations upon earth. This day the story has only just begun, of kings and shepherds and of Mary's Son. He spake and straightway the celestial choir in hymns of joy unknown before conspire. The praises of redeeming love they sang, and earth's whole up with hallelujahs rang. Peace on the earth is what the angels sung, for kings and shepherds and for Mary's Son. So people awake, salute the happy morn, whereon a Saviour of mankind was born, and rise to adore the mystery of love, which hosts of angels chanted from above. With them the joyful tidings first begun, of kings and shepherds and of Mary's Son, of kings and shepherds and of Mary's Son, of kings and shepherds and of Mary's Son.
Kate Rusby and Salute the Morn. Tricia, you've mentioned earlier that we need to keep reminding ourselves that Christmas isn't about creating one perfect day. That we need to remember that today, Christmas Day, is the start of a season.
Which means that we've got lots of time to get things right. It's not all about one day. which is why we've got that song, The 12 Days of Christmas, which we sing. But actually, one year to really push this, and make sure we remembered it, Andrew and I decided that instead of giving ourselves presents on Christmas Day, which we, often do, we said this year, we're going to try something. So we actually committed for the 12 days of Christmas to have 12 presents. They weren't huge, chocolate may have been involved, no livestock, so no partridges, no pear trees, and certainly no Lords a Leaping. But it was really fun, actually, and a reminder that it's not all about one day, and there's time to get things right.
For so many people, this won't, for all kinds of reasons, be a happy Christmas. And in your hand there, you're holding a little book that's 80 years old. It was written in 1944, when the Second World War was still raging.
This is, I have to say, not quite my most treasured possession, but it's one of them. And it's this tiny little book that I stumbled across in a second-hand bookshop. And it is very slim, and it has the sort of thin wartime paper one could imagine. And as you say, it was printed in 1944 for Christmas 1944, when indeed the war was still raging across Europe and much of the world, and people were separated from loved ones. They didn't know whether they would see them again at all. They didn't know if they survived, when they would see them. The air attack was at its most intense. Food was short. Presents, if there were any, were going to have to be make do and mend. And at that time, this book was printed. And it contains poems and carols and excerpts from Christmas time literature. And I was struck by the opening preface to it, which says this, and remember the context. Perhaps friends were never so widely scattered, nor homes so broken, their inmates tossed about the world as today. For untold millions, there will be no kindly gathering at the family hearth this Christmas. Oceans and continents divide them from those they love. Unlovely duties will provide barriers to the family circles. Nonetheless, the associations which Christmas time awakens will be powerfully stirred, perhaps more powerfully than in those easier days when they could find their natural outlet. The final outcome of the struggle now raging will hinge upon many things, but not a little upon whether we can come through it, our feelings unhardened and responsive still to the simple and tender graces of home life. And I find that so profound, that actually we know that Christmas is kept in all kinds of circumstances, and for some of us this may be the first Christmas without someone who we dearly feel the lack of around our Christmas table. Or it might be that life has changed and we're not able to do what we had hoped we would do or expected to do. But nonetheless, Christmas comes and maybe is needed more than ever. But what it will look like may be God's gift to you this Christmas and to me. So that's my hope, that the heart of Christmas, which is about Jesus who is with us, and yet more than that, Jesus who is for us, who's on our side, who gets what life is like for us, and even more than that, this Jesus who is not only with us and for us on our side, but ahead of us, making the way. And whatever this Christmas has for us, whatever the days to come, and whatever the new year will bring, we entrust it to him.
Silent night, holy night, all is calm, all is bright, around yon virgin mother and child, holy infant, so tender and mild, sleep in heavenly peace. Silent night, holy night, shepherds quake at the sight, glory stream from heaven afar, heavenly hosts sing Alleluia. Christ the Savior is born. Christ the Savior is born. Silent night, holy night, Son of God, love's pure light, radiant beams from thy holy face, with the dawn of redeeming grace. Jesus, Lord, at thy birth, Jesus, Lord, at thy birth.
It wouldn't really be a Christmas programme without Aled Jones, would it? So there he is with John Williams on guitar. And so, with many thanks to my guest this morning, Tricia, the Right Reverend Tricia Hillas, Bishop of Sodor and Man, and my thanks to you for listening. This is Judith, wishing you a truly blessed Christmas day. Nolik Gennell.